Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, and today I figured we'd do a bit of a throwback weapon featurette, as I have only just unlocked this weapon, the Mosin-Nagant Infantry. This thing has been available for a super long time now, and I just never got round to getting hold of it. You know when there are weapons that you just don't use, not because they're bad or anything, they just aren't weapons that you think to throw on? Well, that was the case for me with the unlock requirements for the Mosin Infantry, and I've so far really enjoyed using it now I've finally got it. So I thought, let's give it a video of its own and break down what it's all about. Now, I figured as BF1 just has so many weapons at this point, the best way to look at the Mosin Infantry today is to compare it with the three most popular infantry scout rifles. At the time of making this video, those are the Martini-Henry Infantry, the SMLE Mark III Infantry, and the Russian 1895 Infantry. I'll be specifically comparing with these three options in order to give you an idea if the Mosin Infantry is worth using when in the same conversation as the three most dominant weapons for usage time where infantry scout rifles are concerned. Note that I haven't included carbines in this discussion as they function slightly differently and have their own set of strengths and weaknesses. So whilst doing this, any stats I give have been sourced from Simthic.com, which has more accurate statistics than BF1 itself, and any opinions given are purely my own. So let's crack open these stats, and I won't be going too deep into this as we all know that scout weapons mainly come down to damage, range, and a few other factors. The logical place to start would be to say that the Mosin has the same max and minimum damage of your standard scout rifle, those figures being 100 for max damage and 80 for minimum. This is equal to the stats of both the SMLE Infantry and the Russian Infantry, whereas the Martini hits for a max damage of 112 and a minimum of 70. By this point, I'm sure you all know what this means for the Martini, but basically, the Mosin stacks up well against it for range engagements and hitting consistent damage numbers, whereas the Martini is more capable of doing big damage to drop someone at reasonably close quarters, but its damage numbers drop off a lot more, making range fights a tad trickier usually. But this information is worthless without knowing the range capabilities of the weapon. So the Mosin-Nagant Infantry has a sweet spot of between 60 and 98 meters, exactly the same as the Russian 1895 Infantry. So comparing the Mosin against the three most popular infantry scout rifles, it's the equal best choice for longer range fights in terms of raw damage numbers. The Martini dominates at close range with the ability to drop an enemy in one shot between 30 and 80 meters, which is actually a very forgiving stretch, but it is obviously held back by other factors which we'll come to later. And then the SMLE has a one-shot kill range of between 40 and 75 meters. So now, how long does it take for the bullets to reach the target? Well, the Mosin is in a good spot here, once again having the same stat as the Russian Infantry, with the muzzle velocity of 820 meters per second. This comfortably beats out the SMLE Infantry, which is capable of 740, a whole 80 meters per second slower, and it embarrasses the Martini Infantry, which is capable of just 440 meters per second. This is one of the obvious reasons why the Martini comparatively struggles at range. From here, we can note that the Mosin has the same amount of rounds available per reload as the Russian, with 5, whereas the Martini requires you to place a fresh round in after every shot. But the SMLE can utilize a pretty huge 10 rounds per reload, and so by now it's becoming pretty clear that the Mosin is extremely similar to the Russian 1895, and thus could be deemed as a decent option, considering the Russian is, on the day of making this video, one of the top 3 most used infantry scout rifles in the game. Therefore, if you like the Russian Infantry already, then you're very likely to enjoy the Mosin Infantry. Now moving on, and obviously where reloading is concerned, the Martini is dead last, and the Mosin is pretty similar to the SMLE and the Russian in terms of how long it takes to reload. It's not overly quick or slow. The Martini is also dead last for recoil, although not that it matters when you only have one shot per reload. And the Mosin is exactly the same as the SMLE and the Russian. I will say though that all three of these rifles can also chamber a fresh round while staying in ADS. I don't tend to do this, as you'll notice from the footage, as I like to get a view of what's around me between shots, and I'm just in the habit of coming out of ADS. But I'd say that the Mosin is the worst option for staying in ADS between shots, as the actual animation of chambering a fresh round really does obstruct your view, in a way that you just don't experience with the SMLE and the Russian. And then from there, all of the other stats are pretty much exactly the same. As a side note, I'll mention that I'm not sure if I like or dislike the iron sights on the Mosin-Nagant Infantry. It's a little confusing. The outer posts are a bit too thick for me, but in between them is nice and clear. If it turns out that you don't like them, you can of course switch to the radium sights. And then overall, I just had way more fun with this weapon than I expected. I really did enjoy myself. It's satisfying to use and I just seem to gel with it nicely. In terms of a conclusion when comparing it to the 3 most popular options, it's beaten out by the Martini and the SMLE for close range, and it's basically going to come down to personal preference as to whether you prefer the Mosin or the Russian for longer ranges, but I'd certainly say it's worth giving the Mosin a chance if you haven't already. So, what do you think? Do you like the Mosin-Nagant Infantry, or will you stick to your normal scout weapon? If so, what is it? Let me know in the comment section below. Now let's go over to the Board of Awesome for the epic people who allow you to get content from me full time by supporting the channel on Patreon. Without Patreon support, I simply couldn't make this many videos because I would just have to go and get another job. So thank you so much to everyone on here. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and in my pinned comment. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you don't want to miss future videos, turn on notifications with the bell button and select to always be notified on the options tab that should then pop up, and then feel free to like, share and subscribe. I'm GetGoodGuy and I'll see you next time. Laters.